All right. Already a lot of questions coming in. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome everyone to this month's KeyShot webinar. I am Josh Mings, Director of Marketing here at Luxion. How's everyone doing today, first of all? Good? Everything's going well? Uh, Greetings from France. Hello. Will Gibbons. Hello. Hey, James. Well, it's really good to see all you guys. Glad you're here. Sean and Rex are also here with me today, and I tell you what, I'm really excited and looking forward to this webinar today. First of all, there's those times where you learn one thing or something just clicks and completely changes what you're able to create. And for a lot of people, using KeyShot for the first time tends to trigger that response. It's fast, right? You drop some materials on your model and you get results immediately. But really, there is just vastly more to what KeyShot is capable of and what you can create. So today we're going to go beyond just basic mock-ups and dragging and dropping things on, show you how to use KeyShot to create those high-quality, production-ready product shots you see companies all over the world use in commercials, on their websites, and packaging, and all sorts of other things. First of all, just a few examples of customers who use KeyShot right now. And these are customer stories that we've done. And has used KeyShot for everything from successful Kickstarter campaigns to their very popular Outright and Mophie cases. Our latest customer stories with Sequent Group, who uses KeyShot for their global automotive accessory brands. Just a huge company. They're all over the place. And I'm sure you've seen some of these shots. Ferraro Designs created these. They're simple shots for Barnes & Noble, Nook, but they had a lot of requirements with quality to be able to match what Barnes & Noble wanted. And also for the Vento Smart Home product shots on packaging shots. So they're doing it all. And we all know Minimal. They recently brought out their new Apple Watch Lunatic Epic product to market using KeyShot. Very nice imagery there. And one of my favorites is TT Games. They're the makers of those Lego video games. I'm sure you played. And they use it for everything from the communicating concepts directly with Lego to the product shots. So those are just some really cool shots right there too. We have a Wall. They use that. They use KeyShot for all their visuals. And Web of Lamb, you may have not heard of them, but you've certainly seen their shots for the brands that they work with to create the high quality marketing and sales imagery for everything from spray paint to vodka. I just love these shots. And we also have Wilson Sporting Goods in there. Great story on how they use KeyShot. And definitely need to check out TB&O and the work that they do for a lot of companies. They just launched the help Specialized to produce visuals for the Specialized Binge launch. And they used KeyShot VR to create interactive visuals for the website and the project as well. And you can go over to keyshot.com/binge. This might be a little laggy on the GoToMeeting, but you can see just what they're creating with KeyShot and KeyShot VR here. Very, very cool product imagery, very high quality. So there are many, many more, some we can't even mention, and some of you who are listening here, you can see more of those stories on keyshot.com. And as a matter of fact, if you're interested in doing a customer story to show us how you use KeyShot, definitely contact us, send me an email, josh@luxion.com, and we can get a story together. Now, Sean and Rex have a couple great examples they're going to go through step by step, show you exactly what to do to make your visuals pop, and along with the setup and the tweaks that provide all the high quality photorealistic look you need. So guys, Rex, I think you're kicking it off. Yeah?
Yep.
So go right ahead, buddy.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to make myself the presenter
All right.
and show my screen. Are you guys all seeing the paused KeyShot window here with the break scene?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good.
So yeah, as a reminder, a recording of this video will be available on keyshot.com in our resources section, also on our YouTube page, youtube.com/keyshot3d, so you can reference this video at any time. So yeah, my name is Rex Roberts. I'm the lead user experience designer here at Luxion. And actually my degree is in industrial design, and I really have no formal training as a CG artist, which I think is a testament of how easy and powerful KeyShot is. With KeyShot, there's no need to be a trained production CG artist to create these amazing product visuals. You can be a marketer or a designer or whoever. What you really need is just an attention to detail, an eye for composition, and just a basic knowledge of KeyShot and how to use it. So in my section of today's webinar, I'll kind of pick apart the process of how I set up this break scene you're seeing here. I won't have time to go through step by step of how I applied textures and materials and that kind of thing, but I'll break it down into kind of what I see as the 5 main components of a rendering and go through some of my thought process and questions I asked myself to come up with this final result. So before I got into KeyShot, I knew I had this model. I knew that I was going to be rendering out a break. So first thing I did was go on Google Images and find some images for inspiration. I kind of had an idea of the mood that I wanted to achieve, so I looked for images that were similar to that and of similar products. So I found these 2 images. I thought these were nice. They're both very high quality. We're able to see the details in here. So these were my primary inspiration for creating that break rendering. If possible, it'd be great to have the physical product sitting right in front of you as you're doing the rendering. In this case, that wasn't possible for me, but if you are in a production setting, then you can reference that for the fine details, the surface finishes. Is the surface gloss, or does it have a bump on it? Is it a rough surface? How does it behave in different lighting environments? So if you have it on your desk in front of you, maybe you have it under the fluorescent lights in your office, take it outside, look at it under the sunlight to see how it behaves. And you can use that knowledge during the render process, during the setup process. So yeah, the first thing I kind of do is look at these images and assess the level of detail. We see some of these textures in here. We see some metallic paint and metallic flakes. So then I ask myself, what am I able to achieve with my final rendering? And it kind of depends on what resources you have available. How much time do you have to do the rendering? Do you have all of the CAD data necessary? Like in this case, we have some hardware in here, some screws with threading. So do you have that stuff available to you, or do you need to go onto GrabCAD to find some stock models, or do you not have time to do that? Those are all kind of the things that you want to ask yourself. And then, assessing the materials and the textures, like I said, the little bump maps and these spots we see here. The lighting, what's working in this image, what's not working in this image. In this one here, we see some manufacturing imperfections from the CNC. So that's not realistic for us to or at least in this scenario, for me to apply to my model inside of KeyShot. So yeah, it's just important to be aware of all those kind of things, what the level of detail is and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so after taking a look at some examples, then I jumped into KeyShot. Just so you guys know, I'm using KeyShot 6 Beta, and this is the Pro version. So I'll try and point out some of the features I use that are Pro only, what is only in KeyShot 6, and yeah, so basically, like I said, there are what I think is 5 main components of a render setup. And the first one is the CAD, the 3D model. So the break I have here. And then you have your materials and textures. So once your model is imported, then start assigning those materials and textures. Then you set up the camera and the composition. Then your lighting, and finally your final output settings. So it kind of begins as a linear process by going through those 5 steps, and then once you get through those, then I kind of circle back around and take a look at the details again and fine-tune all of those kind of things. Okay, so the first step, the first component is the CAD, the 3D model. So why don't we go back a few steps before I set up the lighting, before I set up all the materials. So here I have a scene set that I've created. Scene sets are a KeyShot Pro feature, and this combines this view set, which has the startup HDR, so that's your default HDR when you import into KeyShot. I don't have any textures applied, just some basic materials that I drag and dropped from the library. So if we compare to the final, you can see we have a lot more interest here, some more gradiated lighting. We have our ground texture. And if we go back, kind of begins to look pretty flat and dull. There's a lack of definition in this dust cover here, etc. So when we're doing a very high quality rendering, something to think about with the CAD model are the radiuses and the filleted edges. So those are important, like as you see here, when you have some nice highlights picking up on those edges. So when you receive the CAD data, does it contain those filleted edges, those radiuses? Does it contain NURBS data? So in this case, this scene does have NURBS data. So if I switch into NURBS mode, you can see the rounded edges are not supported. So we'll see a little bit of difference. We won't be picking up those highlights on those sharp edges like we did when we were in non-NURBS mode, because I've taken this object, this caliper, and I've assigned a slight rounded edge to that. So something to be aware of, and what you want in the final rendering. Is it more important to have those rounded edges? Are those modeled in? Or do you need really smooth curves? When we turn on NURBS mode, we can see we don't get any of those kind of jagged edges on those rounds. So I'd say ideally when in a high quality production setting, NURBS mode is going to give you the highest quality geometry, but it's nice to be able to have those rounded edges modeled in, because when you do go into NURBS mode, if you're using the rounded edges feature in KeyShot, those will not be available. Okay, so then now the second component is the materials and textures. So what are the different material types and finishes? We have a metallic paint here. In our example, we had some nice flakes, so want to be able to achieve that. Let's go back to our final scene set where we have some more textures in place there. So if I go into this material here, we can see this is a metallic paint, and I do have some textures applied. So I've added a noise texture. Last month we did a webinar on procedurals and how you can use those to help enhance the realism of your scene by adding some subtle textures. So as this reses up a bit, you can start to see some of that texture here. And yeah, it might be very subtle, but when this is printed at a large scale or when people are zooming in, those are the kind of details that really make a difference in a production level rendering. I've also added an occlusion procedural. So if I uncheck that, let's see, we can, let me make this a similar blue color here. So this is kind of what it looked like before, and I wanted a little more contrast, some more shadowing in there. So I added that occlusion texture, and notice just in some of these areas where there are some cavities that it really helps pump up the contrast and help define some of the more exposed areas of the model. So in this case, I'm using procedural textures. I believe Sean will go over the use of traditional texture maps, but if you are using traditional texture maps, I highly recommend to use high quality images, 1200 pixels plus. But I think, like I said, Sean will be touching on that a little bit. So let's take a look at some of the other objects in the scene here. Well, actually, something else I thought about was what is kind of the level of importance of each component of this model. So for me, this caliper was the most important. It's bright color. There's the most visual interest in here. The lighting kind of shows these highlights the most. So that was kind of the first priority, and the next was the rotor here. So what I've done with the rotor is I added another procedural just to get that brush texture in here. I added that as a bump map. I have a color gradient in there. It's very subtle. If I just turn it off and on, not a huge difference. But if we look in here, I've kind of added this rainbow of colors. So we could, pump up the saturation on each of these if we wanted to get a little more color, kind of that heat-treated effect. And then we also have some labels assigned. So new in KeyShot 6 is the ability to assign textures to labels. So what I've done here is I have a curvature procedural assigned as a label. So what that allowed me to do was to kind of black out these holes. I thought they were a bit of a distraction. Let's see. So if I uncheck that label, you can see we get some reflections in here. They're a different color, and it starts to be a little distracting. I didn't think that was adding anything to the final render. So I used that curvature procedural to define these areas of zero curvature and positive curvature as black. So that darkened those areas and adds a little more drama and takes away some of the distractions we were seeing before. And the other label I have here is the spots procedural. So that came from referencing this image here. If we zoom in, you see some of these imperfections, and I'm not sure if that is from manufacturing or from use. I would assume this is not being used, but I thought that was a nice effect, so I used that spots procedural to define some areas of spots here on the rotor. Okay, and then on the dust cover, similar kind of thing. In KeyShot 6 now we have the material graph, so I used a bump add node, utility node, to add both a brushed radial effect, which you can see very subtle, and then also the noise just to add some bump there. And then finally, I have a ground plane in here, which is a metallic paint with some diamond plate color maps and bump map. And then if we zoom out, we can see I have an opacity map applied just to give it some fall off. So when we're on our shot, we kind of see that fading out into black in the background. And that was inspired by this image where we have this carbon fiber which kind of fades out to black. I also know Tim Fair, one of the KeyShot evangelists in the automotive world. He's a big proponent of using this technique, so a little inspiration from him as well. Okay, so then when that's the materials and textures. Now let's take a look at the camera and composition. So something to think about when picking your camera and composition is what's the context of the final image? What are the dimensions going to be? In this case, it was just a newsletter image, so I needed it at 1920 by 1080. So that was one of the first things I set here in my image tab. Just selected that preset resolution for 1920 by 1080 and use that to set up my composition. Also reference some of these images. What did I like about this one? I like that you can see this interaction of the break, and let's see, I already closed the other one. Let's open it back up. So here you're seeing a little bit more of the break, but you know, in this case there wasn't as much interest as in here, so I wanted to show a little more of the rotor. And let's see, so I think originally I had it kind of set up like this, but then we had too much of the ground plane showing here, which was a bit of a distraction. So I just got a nice 3/4 shot, took a look at my grid. So you probably all know the rule of thirds. So like I said, this caliper was kind of the main component, main hierarchy of this model. So I tried to position it so it's on these intersection points, which are the focal points when using the rule of thirds. Try and position your focal point or your object of interest on each of these intersection points. Will you be using depth of field in your image? So that's something to consider. It does add to render time, but can add a very realistic effect when doing the final output. Okay, and then finally we have lighting. So before we get to the final output, we'll take a look at the lighting. And let's go back to our scene set. Or here, we'll be in our final scene set, but I'll just change my view set back to the startup HDR. So now we have all our textures still, but this is the default lighting environment that you would get when you open KeyShot. So a question that you need to ask yourself is, do you have KeyShot Pro? Do you have the HDRI editor? Are you going to be using environments from your library, or do you have the ability to create your own environment from scratch? I would say in a production setting, usually the lighting environments are custom made, and in this case that is what I did. So if we go back to our hero here, we can open up the HDR editor and kind of take a look at what I've done here. So all the adjustments are just their default values, and what I've done is just added some pins. So what I like to do is I have this image pin, which is of a sun. Let me find that real quick. So I've created just another folder here for image pins, and let's see if I open this up in Photoshop. We can see it's just a cropped image of a sun that I took from another HDR. Let's see. So there we go. You can see I just cropped an image of a sun, has some cool and warm tones in it, and I just use that as an image pin to place in my HDRI editor. And what I find, especially when working with metallic paints, is that those real-world images, such as the sun, really help bring out the flake and the metallic paint. Having the cool and the warm tones helps as well. Um, so of course your decision of your environment depends on the context of your rendering. So in this case, this is more of a studio environment, so that's the environment that I've created here. But maybe you want something that's in an outdoor environment that needs some more realistic reflections, not just kind of soft lighting. But in this case, I've kind of combined the two a little bit, mainly a studio setup, but I've brought in those image pins. So to do that, just click on this button here and it'll browse to the file. You can use HDR, EXR images, even JPEGs, but they don't have quite the amount of light information. Um, we just had a question uh, from Steve. Yes, I believe I just answered that. You can save out that image pin as an HDR or EXR, and that will, yes, preserve the gamma and those all the lighting information that you find in a 32-bit image. So when using image pins in the HDRI editor, I do recommend using a 32-bit format. HDR, EXR works the best. But if you don't have that, if you only have a JPEG, and you know, there's lots of techniques with image pins. There are some other quick tips, so take a look for those. I don't really have time to go over them for now, but yes, definitely a powerful tool. Um, okay, so yes, we're talking about lighting, and I just showed you the HDRI editor. So another component of lighting is the lighting settings. So these are the real-time settings that affect what you see in the real-time view here. So it's important to optimize these settings and to not go overboard, because as you start cranking these up, then it's going to add to your render time, and it's not very efficient. So in this case, I have no transparent materials, no materials that are too complex. So I'm just using the basic lighting preset, and this is giving me you know, very high quality results without the need to turn up all this stuff. I mean, even global illumination is probably something that you want to have when doing production level renderings, but in this case, you know, it wasn't adding a whole lot to my scene because we have these reflective materials. The light is already kind of bouncing around and reflecting, so having global illumination enabled would just add more to render time. So important to understand these settings and how to optimize them. In KeyShot 6, we have some tips here. If you just hover over, then you can see what each of these settings kind of mean. But yeah, in this case, I'm creating a production level rendering using just the basic preset with all this stuff pretty much turned down. So yeah. Something else to consider with lighting is, do you need any physical lights in your scene, or are there any you know, glowing buttons or lights on the product? Or are there any cavities on the product that are not being lit by the HDRI that you would like to get some light on? So maybe in this case, the image or the pins from the HDRI editor weren't quite getting into this area, so maybe it's easier for me to import just a primitive sphere and position it around this area and then just use a pin light or an IES light to point some light into this area or into areas that require some more illumination. So yeah, physical lights are a powerful tool in this kind of scenario as well. And then finally, go into the image effects. So adding a little bit of bloom and some vignette helps, you know, enhance the realism of the photo. We get a little bit of glow from the brightest pixels in our scene. And then we have some vignetting to add a little more drama. But the important thing here is don't overdo it. Don't crank up your vignette all the way to 1 and don't, crank up your bloom all the way. It just gets overdone. Just like Instagram, and you see those people that just put so many filters on it. Yeah, it's important to be conservative when working with the effects and to not overdo it. Okay, and then or let's see, actually here I've turned down the gamma from the default of 2 to 1.6, and I did that just to darken some of the blacks and add a little more drama. For the most part, keep your gamma at a default of 2. And usually what I'll do is I'll do all my lighting, all that setup first, and then come into the adjustments here and bring this down a little bit if I think the image could be a little darker. If you're rendering this on your local machine, then you can make those adjustments in the render output image editor. So if we go to render this out, you can leave these values in the image tab at their default and just make those adjustments here, and you can save out different variations. So that is a very efficient way of working with your brightness and gamma when rendering locally. Unfortunately, when you use the network or the render queue, you don't have these options. So here, yeah, we're ready to output our final. So what are the considerations that we need to think about here? So what do we want our output format to be? This depends on if we're doing any kind of post-production work. Are we going to take this file into Photoshop after we've rendered it to make some adjustments? So in that case, your TIFF 32-bit and PSD 32-bit are going to contain the most amount of information and give you the most flexibility when modifying that image in post. If you are bringing it into Photoshop, maybe you need some render passes or render layers. So let's say we wanted to make some adjustments to this caliper here, and I wanted that to be on a separate layer. Then all I need to do is select it in real time with my scene tree open. So now we have that part selected, and we just right click. So this is new to KeyShot 6 and only in KeyShot 6 Pro, rendered layers, that is. And then here we can just add a new layer. There we go. And we could rename this to caliper. And then when we go to render our final output, then we'll just check this box for all render layers. If we're rendering a PSD, then we can add those layers to the PSD. So it's all compiled in one document ready to make adjustments on. Okay, and then a couple more things is we have the region render option in KeyShot Pro. So are there difficult areas that require you to render a region before doing your final output? Maybe your final output is a very large scale, which is going to take some time to render. Maybe you want to confirm that these areas indeed look the way you want them to before rendering out that final large-scale image by using the region render. So a very powerful tool just to confirm that some difficult areas are indeed looking the way that you want them to. So we have our format, our resolution, our passes, our layers, and then the next step is to choose the quality. So, in what cases do we use maximum samples? When do we use maximum time and advanced control? So kind of a rule of thumb, for the most part, I'm using maximum samples. For the final newsletter image, I used maximum samples, and actually I kept it, I believe, at a value of 32 because I wanted some of that roughness and that flake to show through in this caliper here. So you don't always need to crank up your render settings all the way to get a very high quality image. It's kind of dependent on the scene. And you can use your heads-up display as a reference to select that number. So new in KeyShot 6, we have samples and time shown here in the heads-up display. So we can see that we have a value of 37, 38 samples, and we can say, oh, well, that looks really good. I'll just set that under the quality settings. Maximum time, if you're under a strict deadline, you can set the time, but I actually prefer to use maximum samples. If I'm rendering on a local machine, you can set this value very high, even larger than the slider allows, and render out that image, and then you can stop it at any time when it looks good to you. And then use advanced control when you need to make adjustments to these other kind of parameters. So obviously you have samples control using maximum samples, but and then ray bounces are taken from your lighting settings tab. That goes for shadow quality as well, but let's say you needed to increase the anti-aliasing because you're getting some jagged edges here. That's when you'd want to use advanced control. So you can also hover over to see the tooltips in here as well, so reference those. And I think I'd like to do another webinar to go into more detail on these quality settings. So yeah, hopefully I didn't go too long over. Before I hand it over to Sean, I'll just ask if there are any quick questions that I can answer. Josh, is there anything that I can address quickly before I hand it over?
No big questions so far. We've been taking care of a few here and there, but I
Cool.
think Sean's good to go.
All right, well, I'm going to make Sean the presenter. Pass it over to you. And there you go. Yes. You're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Got it. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Redsar. I am the creative director here at Luxion, makers of KeyShot. And I have similar background to Rex, as he mentioned earlier. We both went to school for industrial design. And he said we don't have any formal training in CG, but I don't want to sell him short because something that we did do in ID and any kind of art background when you're in school is using real world reference that he kind of, showed amazingly. Things that we take for granted that we just look at and see in everyday life. And the difference between the normal person and an artist is we are able to analyze what's real and what's not when you see a CG image per se, or any kind of representational art, be it like in our case, a CG image. But when I'm learning in school with doing ID, we do analog sketching, or if you're doing sculpting, we're always looking at representational a reference to represent the real world. So so when you see people doing life drawing, that's why you see them look at the life drawing model. Or if you see a landscape painter, they'll be outside and they'll constantly be looking back and forth, and that's why it's just to kind of capture that magic that the real world has. So once you start doing these these references and you're trying to recreate images, you'll kind of open up this kind of second sight that you'll be able to see little details in the real world and see why that makes it just a little bit more popular, more in your images. Um, it'll make you a better artist, and also it'll make you a little bit more annoying to take to on movies. Like if you're going to an action movie, you'll always be the person to be like, oh, that looks so fake because X, Y, and Z. But it's good to know, especially if you're a CG artist. So without further ado, let me go ahead and go into this. So one of the things that Rex was talking about is how to create um, great images for marketing. So what I did was I found this image of a car seat, and basically what I'm going to do is try to recreate it as close as I can, just as an exercise in what I was talking about, using photo images as reference, just so we can like train our brains and train our eyes to see exactly what is going on and what can we do to make it better. I chose also a soft object this time, just to kind of cover points that maybe that is specific to this type of model, and trying not to get too much overlap with what Rex covered because he did some great stuff already. So let's just get into it. I'll show you first how far I got with recreating this image. This is the final right here. As you can see, I actually made it the same dimension as well, and I just tried picking up the details, setting the right lights, just so it looks as close as possible to the real photo that we have as reference. I'm always going to keep this handy to look at when I'm working. That way I can always double back and check, and that way we can make sure we're getting close to our target. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is bring in our model. Fortunately, I knew what this product was, so I was able to actually hold on one sec, get the website up for you. Here we go. I was able to find the actual model on TurboSquid, and you can find it here. And what's great about this too, when you buy models on certain sites like TurboSquid, it actually comes with other materials such as bump maps, and this one actually came with an HDRI to use for lighting as well. So that's a good resource to know if you need a model to use for marketing purposes. A lot of times you can find them on places like TurboSquid and buy them, and they're pretty good quality models. But I'll show you some things that to be aware of when you do buy them, that we can kind of work around or be aware of when you're looking at it. All right, so first thing I'm going to do when I get my model into KeyShot, this is a 3D Max model, so we actually use 3D Max and exported a KeyShot file from 3D Max. So after I brought it in, the first thing I'm going to do is set up my camera. Setting your camera first for me is kind of my workflow. I like to kind of work towards a shot. So all material changes and lighting are working towards a single goal, basically, and that way it looks great from this angle. So that's my first goal. That way, when a lot of times when you're working in KeyShot, you're like sitting at the lighting and you just move it a little bit, and it's like, oh wait, now all my reflections and shadows are off. So what I like to do is make sure that I can get the shot I want and the composition I want from the get-go. This really helps inform all my decisions moving forward. So I'm going to look at my reference photo and kind of match that up. What I'm going to do is just kind of look back and forth. I'm going to go ahead and hide some of these parts so it just looks a little bit more true. There's these extra parts that are here that I can take off. So I'm going to use my camera tab and put it on my grid so I can align it so aligns with the composition. The big thing about this composition, it's all about symmetry. So I'm going to use the halves grid to make sure everything lines up perfectly down the middle. And I'm going to change the perspective a little bit so we can just see a little bit more in our shot. I'm just going to start tweaking it till it looks pretty close to our scene. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my grid. And what I'm going to do is also make sure, I already did this in advance, but I just wanted to fit on the screen, but just to be as representational as possible, I looked at file info and I saw the dimensions of this image, and I went ahead and made them the same dimensions on my scene as well. That way it's as close as possible. Like I said, this is an exercise in just looking at the real world and trying to recreate it. I wouldn't do this for everything, but just as an exercise for yourself as an artist, this is great. Like if you've never done any kind of formal training in art and you want to get into what's the difference between a good rendering and an amazing rendering, is doing these kind of exercises where you're looking at real world reference and trying to recreate it. It's crucial for all artists to go through these steps to just hone in their eyes, basically. Okay, so after I have the image sized up perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and go make camera and create a saved view. And I'm going to go ahead and lock that camera down just so it can't move it. I can unlock it later if I need to look at it from a different angle just to have like a little different view just to see like if I need to zoom in and so forth. But for now, I'll just lock it down for now. So after I have that set up, the next thing I want to do is just kind of rough out the materials. As you can see, there's this all soft leather, and there's going to be a lot to handle to make this hard, shiny thing look soft. So the first thing I'm going to do is add texture maps. A lot of times when you're working with software models or software products or objects, it's going to come down to the texture maps and the model quality. Let me go ahead and unlock this real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. Like as you can see here, like one of the first things I noticed when I looked at this image, which is going to be hard to recreate, is the stitching here. And this model actually has stitching, but it's not quite as nice as the actual real world image. But it's just something to be aware of when you are working with models, that a lot of times it's going to be hard to recreate exactly in the real world. So either you can either model it again or find another angle, a solution, or find another angle, basically. So it's either hide it or make sure it's modeled correctly the first time. Or in this case, we're going to try to use texture maps, basically, to kind of push the realism further. Another thing I noticed on the surface of the leather is just these little bumps and these little imperfections kind of that happen when you're working with fabric or soft objects, which is going to be a little bit more difficult to do here unless you have the tools readily available to deform your model before you bring it into KeyShot. That'd be good, but if you don't, there's other ways you can do that as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. So let me go back into my view, and the first thing I'm going to do is add the texture to this leather. So like I said, this one came with a texture map, but you can always find them online as well, just by searching map, normal, whatever you need to find. So I found this leather normal. And it's a little bit small, so I'm going to go ahead, let me go ahead and scale it up a little bit. Or actually I hit the DPI, so it's the actual dimensions of the pixels are true to the size of our scene. So that actually scaled up quite a bit already. Now it's too big, so now I have to do is scale it down. So I'm going to maybe, let me scale it down by half and see what that looks like. It's a little bit too small now. So like I said, you could look at your reference material when you're doing this kind of, you know, adjusting of your texture map. Sometimes, you know, you forget that when you're adjusting, it's like, it doesn't look quite real. Is this real enough? If you're not sure if it looks real enough, always look back at your reference.
Hey Sean,
Huh?
can you boost the gamma on your scene a little bit? It's a little bit dark.
Okay. Let me see.
Maybe just for now.
Let me just boost this up just.
Much better, yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so yeah, like I was saying, like if a lot of times when you're working with this, it's easy to forget that you to look at reference all the time to make sure it's real. So instead of just like saying, this looks kind of real, look at your reference and try to match, you know, what is actually going on with the grain. And that way you can be sure that it is actually getting closer to what real is. So I'm just going to go ahead and dial that in. And you can, you know, adjust that and then dial it in a little bit more, but I'm going to keep on moving. The next thing I want to kind of rough out, like I was talking before, is the lighting. So again, when I bought this model, it came with quite a few resources for me to use. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the one that was given to me as a kind of starting point for me to go and just drop it in. It doesn't have to be perfect from the first go around. I should have done this first actually before. That way it doesn't have to raise the gamma. Oh, actually, there we go. That way you can see the surface development there. So yeah, I'm just using this just to kind of rough out the lighting. Don't be too concerned about is it going to, the reflections look good right now? And you just bring in something that has good realistic lighting, such as like really good sunlight, some warm tones and some cool tones, which this fulfills quite nicely. So yeah, like I said, don't worry too much from the roughing out stage about getting the lighting just perfect. As long as you can see surface development, that's what you need. So I'm going to go ahead and again look at the reference and make this background white, just like that reference. And this is when I start talking about the colors. So the default white color for the background when you go into, when you choose the color background is this super white, maxed out values white. This is a kind of rule of thumb when you're choosing colors in KeyShot for your diffuse or your background or whatnot. Nothing in the real world is absolute white or absolute black. So a good thing to do is just kind of when you look at anything that has like a white value or a black value that you want to use as black or white, open up the color panel and just kind of knock it back just a little bit. And just by knocking it back just a little bit, maybe adding a little warm tone to it, it just adds just a little bit of touch of realism to your scene. As you can see, it kind of already, this has a warm white tone to this background as well. And it kind of just adds just a little bit more realism. So it'll show up more as you're working along, as all these components are adding together and selling the illusion of a real photo. So that's something that's really important. It's just anytime you see absolute black or white, I'm not saying it's all the time, but a rule of thumb is if you can, just knock it back just a touch, and it'll really sell it more. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and look at the material of the leather, which is a plastic material, which is good. It has a nice shiny quality. I'm going to go ahead and take the diffuse color, which is, again, default. It's going to be absolute 00 black RGB values. And I'm just going to raise that just a little bit off from total black. And that will just sell the material as being real later on as we add all these little elements to it. So now you have your texture, and you can just go ahead and adjust your roughness and specular as you would to try and match the image a little bit. And you can dial it in more as we go. I'm just going to keep kind of going fast, and I'll have another version of this when it's already dialed in. You can dialing in the adjustments. You can like sit there and just keep doing it. So I'm just going to keep moving forward so that way we can get more stuff covered. So next thing I want to do is the centerpiece right here. They have that little label right there. So what I'm going to do is actually shift left click the leather and just shift and left click to paste on the middle parts, just so we can have that same leather material right there. What I'm going to do is go into our labels subtab in our materials. I'm going to click on the add label, and I'm going to select the mask, which is a black and a white image right here. So off the bat, you're going to see this, and it's going to look not quite like this. And here's what is going to be awesome. What you can do is, now that in KeyShot 6, we can actually apply materials to our labels. So actually, when you go to our labels tab, there's going to be label properties and label textures subtabs. So when you go to label properties, you can control the different values of the material that you chose. So and it's a full material basically. So not only can you add diffuse and all that, you can use the maps of the properties as well. So a plastic has an opacity map available to it. So I'm going to go ahead and use that, just click and drag to the opacity channel. And that'll turn that into an opacity map for this label. And I'm going to go ahead and change the color of this material on this label to a red color. And I'll just go ahead and size this up. And just add a little bit of roughness to it maybe. And we can do too as well is, let me make sure this is properly aligned. We can do as well is you go back to your textures tab for the overall material of your leather, select the bump, and select apply bump to labels. And now let me zoom in here. You can actually see the label has the texture of the leather being pushed through to the label. Go ahead and snap back to our view. So that's a pretty good start. So now I'm just going to do the same with the suede area. I'm just keep that plastic, and I'm just going to change a color. We can also do, it's also, if you want to, instead of trying to like use the sliders or the color picker, what you can do is actually use the eyedropper tool to actually use your photo as a reference. So what I'm going to do now is use the eyedropper tool, use to pick a color, and that lets you choose anywhere on your screen, not only in KeyShot, but if you have a website open or an image somewhere else on your screen or available, like your reference image, you can use that for your color reference. So it looks a little bright. From there, you can adjust it and just fine tune it from there. And again, I'm going to go ahead and use another texture map for the suede. Again, I found this suede online by just searching. Just search suede bump map, and all these came up. This one's actually from Filter Forge, which is a normal map. You can use that. Again, like what Rex said, the bigger the file size, the better. the more data you have to work with, it's always going to be better to use for a map. Because if you're scaling it up, you don't want to see, all of a sudden you'll see pixelations. Like that'll really pull away from the realism. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use this leather normal. I mean, that's the wrong one. And use the suede normal. Again, I'm going to use the DPI. And this just starts roughing it out. And again, just go back to your properties and make your adjustments to kind of replicate the suede material. And this is just roughing it out. Like you can, from here, you have your two types of leathers, and then now you have to do your plastic. It's the same process. You select this, which is it actually is a plastic material, and again use the bump map and apply a texture. This time I'm going to use noise texture just to add a little bit of noise to create this kind of texture that you see here. I'm going to scale this down, maybe increase the specular, just make it a little bit brighter, reduce this roughness just a little bit, just to kind of rough it out. Okay, so from here, let's, once you get to kind of a close spot where you feel like you kind of got all the materials kind of roughed out, look again at your, let me close this so we can see this better. Look at your reference and see what's missing, basically. This is where you start dialing in everything a little bit more tighter. There's this thing right here, it looks like finger swipes and a little bit modeling to the sway that's happening that's going to add a lot of realism. And you got to think, well, how is that going to happen? How am I going to recreate that? And figure out, trying to like analyze all your little things that are happening here that aren't happening in your scene. Again, like right here, maybe the highlights here are a little bit off. The color's a little bit off here. The lighting looks a little bit on the leather. Looks overall, it's a little bit warmer in the photo versus our scene. So those are little things that you can kind of touch on. And take note of, basically. You always want to like take note of like literally write down things that you think you should address in your scene. So the next thing I want to do basically is just, let me go ahead and maybe I'll bring in another scene that is a bit closer to what we have. So the first thing I want to do is tackle the lighting. So I did to the lighting, I'm going to go ahead and open the HDR editor. Again, this is a pro feature like Rex is talking about. But let me show you what I did to recreate this lighting. So what I did was, in their adjustments, I selected the colorize swatch here. And what this will do, it will actually just tone the lighting, the total lighting that's happening here. As you can see, if I kind of move this around the color picker here, it'll actually change the color of the HDRI to tone it to a certain color. What I did also was to use the Kelvin scale to start with, and that'll help me create accurate light temperatures in the real world to tone my lighting with. So I wanted to have a more warmer tone, so I went towards the warmer side of our temperature scale for our lighting. And also to recreate kind of a higher reflection on the top of our leather, I tilted the HDR just a bit, so the window here could be raised just a little bit, and that will cause the reflections to shift on our leather. So from there, I also started applying. A big thing of this scene was the suede. The suede's really what's going to sell this scene to look more real. So what I did was, after I added the bump map, I actually added the specular map, which was the same image. I just kind of you can either hold Alt and drag it, or you can just actually just open it and choose the same file, and make sure you have the sync check selected when you have the same image used for both. And the next thing I want to do is recreate these finger swipes that are happening in the suede that kind of creates that different kind of color textures that are happening here. And maybe if I can create this suede modeling, I feel like if I can kind of replicate that, it'll really push the realism of this scene. So what I did to get these finger swipes was, you can never, when you look, when you're looking at maps, a lot of them are just like square swatches like we found here. What I actually did was just create my own image that I can use as those finger swipes. So I went into Photoshop, and I knew I was going to use this image as an opacity map with a material like I did last time. So I used a black and white image, and I just used a nice kind of organic looking brush that I found with the brush library. And I just started making swipes, and you can control the flow and opacity and so forth. I won't get into too many details about creating the perfect brush stroke, but you can find a lot of different types of brushes in Photoshop and recreate it there. This is the one I kind of went with. I kind of erased it on the end just so it kind of tapers off a bit. That way it kind of looks like it's fading off when it's being used. Okay, and then I just saved that. It's a high quality, I think it's, let's see how big this was. Yeah, it's pretty big. It's 2634 by 1902 pixel dimension. So let me go ahead and, so my plan is I'm going to add that as a label on here. So I just added that image right there and kind of place it where I think it looks like where it's going to be. And it's already plastic. It's kind of like the same material that the suede is. So I'm going to just go ahead and do the last thing I did last time with the label, like the Recaro label. I'm just going to click and drag that to the opacity. And from there, I'm going to just change the roughness value in the specular. As you can
Hey,
see,
Sean,
uh-huh.
I'd also like to add that labels support transparency, so you could have saved it out as a PNG or a TIFF, just hiding that black background. Um, it depends on your workflow, but that is also supported.
Right. I just use the black because it's easier to see the brush when I'm making it. Yeah, so either workflow works. This is just what I did. Yeah. So you can fine tune your finger strokes with the using the label properties and label textures. What I like to do is under label textures, I'll go down to brightness, and that'll help me in the way kind of fade it in and out. If I want it to be a little bit less punchy, I'll just bring it down until it you can kind of just see an innuendo of that finger strokes on the surface. And the next challenge that is going to be like was a little bit rough for me was trying to create the modeled pattern. Um, I think the best thing to do was use the material graph to add some more texture to the surface. So what I did was I go ahead and open up my material graph, and what I did was create another material. Make sure that's plastic, just like the same as our suede material, and just go ahead and drag that on. It'll create another label. And from there, let's see what I did. Right, so I added another texture, added another bump. Actually, instead of using an image, I used noise fractal. Go ahead and close this out so I can look at the settings for this. And go ahead and change these values. Just so it starts showing up. This is the part that takes a little bit of tweaking to get right.
Sean, I think you could assign that noise fractal just as a diffuse map and then assign 2 different color reds, maybe?
Oh, I think how I did it was I assigned it as a opacity map. So that way it retains the color of the original material. And I just use that and just kind of change the values of the fractal into, yeah, here we go. That's how I did it. And that way, like, some parts become lighter and some parts become darker, but of the original material. That way, it's pulling from the original source. Does that make sense, kind of? So what I did was use this as an opacity and choose darker values when I'm choosing my colors for the noise fractal, and that becomes your opacity color maps. Basically, it'll pull through the original color that's on the material, and that's how I got the kind of the modeled effect I wanted to go for. And I scaled it up and changed, used all these different adjustments to kind of get the right amount of modeling I wanted to the suede material. And this can go on forever. But like Rex was saying before, make sure you set yourself like a timeline about, you know, what does your project do basically, and how much realism do you want to keep adding until you run out of time. So make sure you schedule out these specific areas that you want to give yourself. Like I said, like when you're analyzing the final output and what you actually want to accomplish. Like I said, like I wanted the suede to be kind of the thing that really pushes the realism of my scene. So I gave myself a lot of time to really develop the suede material when I was working on this scene. Let me go ahead and pull in um, another scene that was. Yeah, so this is a little bit closer. As you can see, like the suede has a little bit more modeling, and it has the texture kind of adjusted, and you can see the finger swipes adding it all together. So once I got to this point, it's just like, okay, do I stop here? Do I keep going? And I felt, I just kind of keep going and keep going till I could kind of show you guys how close you can get. But like I said, you got to plan ahead and you got to think about how much time you have to devote to each kind of specific area of detail, because you can just noodle around for forever on like one specific area and just keep going and going, and you all of a sudden you'll run out of time to do work on everything else. So really manage your schedule. So after I kind of adjusted everything, then that's how I got to um, this final scene where you see the suede is a little bit has that nice modeled effect, and you see the light hitting the different um, the raised areas of that suede has, and it'll has a little finger swipe that kind of replicates the real world photo, and you get the light bouncing, and you see the label kind of match the same specular level. Even at this point, I could say I could even go further, but like I said, it's all about scheduling the amount of time that you want to add to the realism, and what's your final goal going to be?
Hey, Sean,
Mhm.
on the leather, some people are wondering about what specifically did on the leather to take it from that first stage that you had to what you have now, or what setting changes or what tweaks that you did over time there.
Like I said, like it was a lot of it was just adjusting the roughness and diffuse and specular to see how I kind of just took it off just a little bit off perfect white and off perfect black. I just kept tweaking the size and the bump height until it kind of looked that way. I mean, it's just about constantly looking at your photo reference and evaluating, okay, did I make this adjustment? How does that affect my scene? If I make this adjustment, how does that affect that scene? So a lot of times when you when you're working from the rough, you need to stop for a little bit and then reevaluate and keep, you always want to reevaluate your work and compare it to the real world reference that you're working with.
And
It's
some of that's going to be in the lighting too, like on
exactly
the
like that's
highlight
right.
across the label there.
Hmm.
Someone was asking about getting the the specular across the label also. How do you make sure that that's falling across everything?
Well, like I said with the label that I applied, it is actual material that we can adjust. So with I made it kind of match the specular, the leather that it's being applied on. It actually made it a little bit, maybe I tried to make it a little bit shinier if I could, like reduce the roughness. Because when you see a label that's actually printed on leather, it's usually a different material. It's actually shinier plastic look.
So
Um,
you can control that a little separately from the rest of the leather.
Right. So with KeyShot 6, there's a little bit more detail you can add to your labels by applying, having each one is an actual material, which is awesome. So having that kind of control for each labels is just, really up the game of KeyShot. Like, adding this as a label and adding these finger swipes. Like each of these little details are all separate materials on the same. There's like, two materials here and then three materials actually being used here technically. If you look at the material graph, there's actually three materials being used on the single material that's being applied on the suede. Um, does that make sense? Kind of,
Yeah,
just the
yeah,
amount of detail that's available is just really phenomenal now.
great. Well,
Hey guys, along the lines of textures and materials, I'd also like to mention KeyShot Cloud. A lot of people are asking, where to find high quality textures and materials. And actually available in KeyShot 5 and KeyShot 6 is the KeyShot Cloud. Sean, you want to press T to show your toolbar real quick? And you can open up the cloud library where you have access to tons of materials and textures that users have uploaded, that our partners have provided us. So we have hundreds of leather materials that were provided by Sorensen Leather. So these are all super high quality, made specifically for KeyShot. Yeah, so we can see we have some of those. We also have the Mold Tech materials, which are production quality materials with production quality textures for plastics. So yeah, if you're looking for high quality textures, check out the Mold Techs, check out the Sorensens, all on KeyShot Cloud. It's free to sign up for, free to download all of these resources, and they'll go right to your KeyShot library for you to be able to use at home.
all right. Well, we're running a little long on time. If you've got other questions, head over to the forum and ask them and share your shots with us while you're there. And remember also, definitely want to make sure KeyShot 6 is in fact coming soon. I know everyone's waiting for it. We're getting closer every day, and if you're not on KeyShot 5 yet, be sure to buy or upgrade to KeyShot 5 before the release so you can get that free upgrade to KeyShot 6. And as Rex mentioned, we'll be posting this webinar later this week on YouTube, and it'll also be available on keyshot.com under resources. So that wraps things up for today. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.